What's up, everybody? Here for an extra special episode of the Power Hour with Professor Carlos El Garrido and our newest intern, our very first intern, a new member of the production team, Eli. He's a politics major, getting his or doing his internship for credits right now, and he's doing it with us, which is badass. And we met through wrestling. So, what's up, Eli? Welcome.
How's it going, guys? Nice to be here.
You bet, you bet. We're just gonna talk about a bunch of random stuff today. I know the JFK files were released. Well, what the CIA and the State Department wanted to be released, anyways. But there was still some interesting stuff in there, particularly talking about the CIA connections between Hungary in 1956. Which was basically a fascist government that the USSR went in and overthrew. And for years, communists have been smeared, the term tanky itself stems from that event, with the people who supported the overthrow of that fascist regime being derided as tankies. And now we're getting evidence years later that it was, in fact, a CIA-backed Nazi government, essentially. But we'll talk about all that and more after we play the intro.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red, and if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard."
All right. So a little bit of a correction there. Carlos corrected me. I was thinking of, I believe it was Finland that actually had the Nazi government that the USSR toppled. What happened in Hungary was they had a socialist government, one of the East European socialist countries, and there was a color revolution effort, which now we're learning the CIA was directly involved with, which, go figure. Anywhere there's a sovereign, especially socialist government around the world being overthrown, usually the CIA's fingerprints are all over it. So it's like one of those things that those who have a theoretical understanding of imperialism have understood forever, but now there's proof, which tends to happen a lot. This is one of the things that I talked about in my article on hindsight anti-imperialism, where if you understand the motive forces behind imperialism, which are finance capital, the conquering of markets and resources and labor around the world, you understand that it's these finance capitalists who are always behind these regime change, no matter how hard they try to cover it up. But there are those who, don't make that realization, or won't take that position until years later we get declassified CIA documents that prove what the quote unquote tankies knew all along. And this is where we get all the memes about the burden of always being right. But it really is, it is kind of true, having that theoretical framework, and a scientific understanding of politics, which is, I know, foreign. Like Eli and I studied politics, both of us in the Western Academy. And, a lot of the times the hard sciences are divorced from the social sciences. But, you really can't have a materialist and theoretical understanding of the economic and political system that you're in, which really helps you understand the events that happen. Yeah, I mean, Carlos and I were talking about this today. He was watching, sorry, this is a little bit off the beaten path, so you can take it back if you want, Carlos, when you get your turn to speak. But he was telling me today how you were seeing in real time the different historical moves that Hegel predicted, where the new generation, its sort of culture and zeitgeist becomes like mocking the old generation. And we were watching these TikToks of people mocking like millennial hipsters from 2010, like people who listen to the Lumineers, basically. And now it's like a whole culture online to mock that. So it's like, what's serious in one era becomes mocked and comedy in the next, it seems like.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, what's up, everybody? It's been maybe a couple months since I do one of these live streams. I've been, of course, doing the show and focusing on doing videos for my newly public Instagram, which you can check out if you haven't already at carlos.l.garrido. Hungary is so interesting because it was the first like successful color revolution, I think, or the first. It was successful in one way. It wasn't successful in the sense that it toppled the power of like the Soviet-backed socialist government, even though it came somewhat close to that. It was successful in the fact that it completely divided the left globally. There were many people who were supportive of the Soviet Union, of the Soviet experience in socialism, who then became very critical and abandoned it for this false attempt at neutrality, this false position of neither Moscow nor Washington, because of Hungary, because they drank the Kool-Aid. They believed the narrative around Hungary, which was that this is a popular rebellion that's grassroots. It's coming from the people. The people doing it are all Marxists, and they're the real Marxists that are standing up against Soviet bureaucracy and against this despotic Soviet regime. And they ate it up. A lot of them were Westerners themselves, of course. This is what the Western left has always done. It's always accepted and given a left-wing tinge to what is basically the same narrative of the State Department, of the deep state. And what the Stalinists said at the time, and I don't even know if you can call them Stalinists, because it was, of course, under Khrushchev, which had just started to embark on the process of de-Stalinization. But what the Marxist-Leninist, Soviet-aligned camp said at the time was that, no, this is not this popular rebellion against the Soviet-backed government that, of course, is imperfect and has its flaws. This is actually something that has been fomented by the West through various institutions. There's a lot of scary figures that are involved that are pulling back from very ultra-nationalist and fascistic roots. And it's very similar to the same color revolution playbook we've seen over and over again. I mean, if you think back to Maidan in 2014 in Ukraine, of course, there were people that were there that were genuinely discontented with the government at the time. And, they felt like it was a genuine grassroots expression of some form of autonomous political subjectivity. But the reality was that the key players, the people that made all the important moves, the people that had the financing that was backing them, that allowed them to make those moves, were, in the case of Ukraine, of course, the neo-Nazis that were US backed. And they were the sort of vanguard of this color revolution movement. And even though it had the superficial element of popular grassroots rebellion, it wasn't that. It was fully orchestrated by the West and by the NGOs, and that's part of the color revolution doctrine, having the appearance of it being something grassroots and popular, and based in the experiences of regular working class folk. And the first time that was tried, I think, was in Hungary in 1956, and many people in the left fell for it. People who were up until that point really good Marxist-Leninists, like Lukács. Georg Lukács he died in the Communist Party. He rejoined the party right before he died. He has statements where he says things along the lines of, the worst form of socialism is infinitely better than the best form of capitalism. So this is not someone that was condemning the Soviet Union and asking for capitalist restoration or anything like that. But when Hungary happened, he fell for the lies, and it convinced a whole lot of people. I think Sartre was one of the ones that fell for it as well. So the fact that now these documents are out and they confirm basically what the Marxist-Leninists, the communists, have been saying all along, which was that this was a color revolution attempt, it just shows once again that what does it mean to be a tanky? What does it mean to be a Marxist-Leninist? It means that you're the one that got it right from the start, even while people said you were a conspiracy theorist or the defender of X, Y, or Z regime, an apologist or X, Y, or Z regime. To be a tanky is to be the person that gets it right from the start, not 20 years after, as the hindsight anti-imperialists do, as Eddie calls them. The people that get it right when it's fucking unpopular, when the media's pushing out the lies and most people are accepting them. The people that tell the truth in those moments are the tankies.
Absolutely. It's a super devious strategy. And it would be interesting. I think this is maybe the first, Hungary was the first example of a color revolution effort that they frame as being left wing. And then in the 90s, that was really perfected. We saw it in Poland and all over the place. And of course, the Euromaidan, but even Euromaidan followed like the Revolution of Roses, the Orange Revolution. All these different revolutions were backed by arms like the CIA and the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. And all of them were framed as democratic, as progressive, as quote unquote left wing. And it tricked a lot of people, I would say, at least in the West. And this is, again, partially due to like the Congress for Cultural Freedom and whatnot. But a lot of the people who have Marxist politics tend to be more socially liberal, I guess. Even Michael Parenti, who's someone who I consider to basically be a Marxist-Leninist. Even he, is pretty, I get he's more of like a standard left-winger than maybe someone like our friend Haz al-Din, or some of the Marxist-Leninists we have today who hold maybe more conservative social positions. And it's basically a tactic that preys upon that and uses it to weaponize or, weaponize people's compassion and their sort of social liberalism to get them to support color revolutions against Marxist-Leninist states. We're fighting for freedom of speech, we're fighting for women's rights, and nowadays we're fighting for LGBTQ rights. Meanwhile, when these governments get overthrown, we see what happens in Ukraine, where they get taken over by Nazi regimes who shutter the media and who shutter opposition parties and who take all of our tax dollars while we can barely pay for groceries here at home for the better part of 10 years. So it's a devious strategy, and it's a strategy that's evolved greatly since 1956. But it's always sort of been the same thing. And I would say the National Endowment for Democracy has become like the main org or the main arm of the State Department that funds this and that pushes this in various countries. They were probably the primary organization that was involved with the 2014 overthrow of Ukraine's government that put in this crooked Nazi regime that your and my tax dollars have been funding for the past 10 years. And I mean, even in the name, National Endowment for Democracy, we're spreading democracy, we're spreading human rights. That was created in the 1980s by the Reagan administration because the CIA had so much bad press, because people recognized that the CIA was, this unelected body in the U.S. that can kill the president of the United States if they want, allegedly, or that can overthrow sovereign governments all around the world. So what they did was create a private body, not a body that's directly tied to the U.S. government. It is directly tied to the U.S. government. The U.S. government gives your taxpayer money to the National Endowment for Democracy, but technically they're not connected to the state, so it gives them more plausible deniability. But they've been one of the main arms pushing this, and they have a whole social media division. Like, these people are deeply involved on Twitter, on YouTube, on the social media platforms that we use, trying to convince us that these quote unquote revolutions that are actually coups are progressive. And another book that sort of lays out how this works is Samantha Power's A Problem from Hell, which was published in the 2000s, and basically makes the case that all these countries around the world who the U.S. doesn't like are doing genocide. So we need to get more involved in overthrowing these governments. And she was one of the architects behind the 2011 NATO destruction of Libya that brought slavery back to that formerly prosperous country. And under the Biden administration, she was appointed to be the head of USAID, which now, one of the good things from the Trump administration is that they seem to be basically just canceling USAID, which is great. But shout out to PXE. Thank you, comrade, for the super sticker.
I think that one of the interesting things that you mentioned there is the fact that after these governments are toppled, even though the way of justifying those regime change efforts is by appealing to liberal democratic values of free speech and X, Y, or Z bourgeois rights, the interesting thing is that it is never the case that the new government that is put in its place is anywhere near as good as the previous government that they overthrew. It is always the case that even by the bourgeois standards of liberal democracy, human rights, all these different basic categorical structures for analyzing society from the bourgeois form of point of view, even through those metrics, things still get worse in every single case. I mean, take every example, Libya. How is Libya more democratic, more free, even by bourgeois standards after that? It's not. Take Ukraine. How is Ukraine more democratic, more free, even by bourgeois standards? It's not. It's completely abolished any dissident party. It's closed down any dissident media. It's persecuted any opponents and people that are critical of the official narrative of the ruling regime. So, we're in this situation where I think socialism as a form of life cannot be judged through the same categorical paradigm of bourgeois democracy. What democracy, what liberty, what all of these terms mean in the context of the capitalist form of life is not what they mean in the socialist form of life. So when they say, these societies are undemocratic, from their standpoint of bourgeois democracy, they're absolutely right. Because the democracy there, it's not the democracy of the insignificant minority, the democracy of the rich, it's the democracy of the people, which is what real democracy is all about. So we have to be conscious that each form of life has a certain categorical set and framework through which it has to be analyzed. You can't go watch The Boy in the Striped Pajama, judge it accordingly to the standards of comedy, because it's a completely different paradigm that you need to take to it. Imagine someone walking out of the movie theaters being all pissed off because they didn't find it funny. You would slap them because they'd be fucking idiots, because it's not meant to make you laugh. It's a whole nother type of series and framework that you need to use to analyze that tragic film. And it's the same thing with socialism. But the interesting thing is that even if you participate in this misunderstanding that's premised on using like the grammar, as Wittgenstein would say, of one language game onto another, or like trying to play chess with checkers pieces. Even if you do that, it still happens that the government that was there before made more sense, even by those standards, than the one that's input afterwards. And that's the thing. Like, there's no world, there's no empirical evidence where any of the actions that they take brings about a positive result, even by their own distorted standards.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I was in the theater watching Schindler's List, they were cracking up. I think I went to the Groyper viewing or something. that was a really good analogy. It made me laugh too. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It makes me think of Lacerdo's tree that we're always using. Oh, it's not the best picture. It's not very big. That's not what we want. You've been owned by Lacerdo's tree. I can't really get it to pull up big here, but basically, countries need to establish sovereignty before they're able to establish economic well-being, and then out of that grows civil, political, and cultural and environmental rights, which, as Carlos said, in a lot of these Western coup governments, those the previously existing government did a better job of upholding civil, political, and cultural rights, even from a liberal perspective, than the governments that replaced them, these like fascist regimes that replaced them. But still, these countries being under siege, it makes it hard for them to just essentially construct a utopia, which is what a lot of people seem to want them to do. When you're like with China, for example, they do censor the internet, but what else are they supposed to do when the NED is actively trying to overthrow their government through the internet? And one sec, I gotta put my phone or my iPad on do not disturb here. I'm getting texts from Comrade Halali right now.
Same.
Yeah. What are they supposed to do when the NED perfected this strategy during the Arab Spring, where they basically used social media to weld together opposition forces and create the Syrian civil war and the overthrow of the Egyptian government and the overthrow of the Libyan government? A lot of that was done through social media platforms. A lot of the because what you had in a lot of those Arab Spring color revolutions were not, so much genuine uprisings of the people, but the CIA was literally shipping terrorists into Libya. They're going to Sudan, grabbing the most like disgusting terrorist ape people that they could and bringing them over to Libya to destroy the prosperous and civilized and economically stable system that they had created there. And they did the same thing in Syria, and they failed to overthrow the Assad government at first, but eventually they were successful in doing so. But a lot of those groups were brought together through the power of social media. So as the U.S. is trying to do the same thing in Western China in the Xinjiang region with groups like the ETIM, as they're trying to unite all the terrorists in that region to overthrow the Chinese government and promote separatism, what is China supposed to do besides censor that? Are they just supposed to let that run rampant? Would we let that run rampant in the U.S. if Russia was giving arms to a bunch of terror groups and using the internet to get them together to start, to revive the KKK in America and get them to overthrow our government? Of course not. Of course that would be cracked down upon. It's even more ridiculous in the case of Venezuela, because there was a guy who stole when I tell you this, I want you to think about this happening in the United States. The guy stole a military helicopter. He flew it to the Capitol in Caracas and was firing grenade launchers at the Capitol building. And then when the Venezuelan police forces went to arrest that guy, he fought them. There was a gunfight, and they ended up killing him, right? And the U.S. portrayed that as, oh, no, look at this authoritarian government killing their own people. And it's like, yeah, if you got in a U.S. Apache attack helicopter and flew it to the White House and were shooting grenades at Donald Trump, yeah, you're going to get arrested and probably killed. Any country on earth would do that, but our media is such a disgusting blob of shit, they'll seize on anything and turn it that way. Look at the infringement on freedoms. So what that they just built 13 colleges and are offering them to their students who earn it for free? Who cares that they're doing all of these programs to combat malnutrition and infant mortality and bring stuff to their people despite the economic sabotage that they're under? We're not going to do a single story on that. We're going to do 47 stories about how the authoritarian government cracked down on the poor freedom fighter who launched grenades at the Capitol.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why, I mean, when we hear these words, democracy, liberalism, we have to always ask for whom. That's the Leninist question. Democracy for whom? Liberal and liberty for whom? Not for working people, not for people who are indebted. It's for the elite, the capitalists, the banksters, the investment firms, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards, those who experience actual freedom and democracy in this form of life. It's not the people.
Yeah, people always say this stuff like in communist China, the former emperor used to live so well. He had slaves, and the revolution came and they took his slaves and they made him into a street sweeper. Isn't that totalitarian? It's like, man, I would love to see Bill Gates outside my house right now sweeping the streets so he knows what it's like to work a real job for once in his life. I mean, these are people who gamble with the economy. That's what they do to make their living. Speculation is literally just gambling with the stock market, which is a paper representation of the real economy. That's how we run our economy. People like Bill Gates gamble with it and use that to inflate their own profits, while 80% of us live paycheck to paycheck. So like, yeah, make those people work regular jobs. That's the kind of authoritarianism that I want to see, the authority of the working class being asserted over the parasitic, exploitative ruling class. Well, shout out to Peter for the $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Peter. It says, joined reserve ACP. Let's go. Round of applause for Peter for joining the ACP. Great job, man. Thank you. We're super happy to have you. If you haven't yet joined the ACP, please do so at acp.us so you can help us get to work in doing what I was just talking about, asserting the authority of the working class in this country over and above the ruling class that is so thoroughly conquered our political system and economic system. Currently getting my bachelor's in studio art. My work is heavily influenced by Mexican muralism. Oh, Carlos is Mexican. And Soviet Chinese realism, as well as ACP and Carlos's books. Badass. That's really cool to hear, man. I'd love to see some of your art. I like the Soviet and Chinese realism. I did a whole stream the other day. I had to delete it for random reasons that aren't related, nothing bad. But I had a whole stream on Soviet realism compared to American Congress for Cultural Freedom propped up postmodern art. And I just think Soviet realism is so much more badass. I haven't looked into Chinese realism at all though. But yeah, also cool that you're inspired by Carlos's books.
Thank you, comrade. And welcome to the party. I've been commenting on a lot of art and culture related stuff on Instagram. There was two that specifically had to deal with this topic. There was this one guy that's like a male classic menswear person who wears like, well, it's basically Kyle. It's like a gay Kyle. And
So
he was he'd shoot us if he heard that. He was talking about how clothes isn't made with the same attention to detail anymore. And detail isn't just like the stuff you see on the actual garments. It's like how they're meant to fit, the thought that goes behind, how they're going to look on the body, and is it going to have the sort of silhouette shape, or is it going to have an awkward fitting or something like that. And I commented on it, and the comment itself was something that got a lot of likes, which is, this is a reflection in fashion of what has happened with postmodernism. Because if we look at some of the best Marxist critics of postmodernism, postmodernism is the subjection of everything to this level of depthlessness and superficiality, where there quite literally is no depth to art. I mean, you used to be able to go to a museum of pre-postmodern art and actually look at paintings for half an hour and take something meaningful from it. And half an hour would pass, and there'll still be parts of the painting that you're looking at and analyzing and in awe about the fact that someone was able to take a paintbrush, paint, and do that over countless hours. And now you're looking at it in a museum and valuing it. Postmodern art is very superficial. It's like the perfect depiction of it is like the banana that's taped to the door. It's like, what the fuck is that? If you sit there for 30 minutes looking at that, you're gonna end up fucking schizophrenic, like Clockwork Orange. It's not art. It's the complete degrading and dehumanizing of the human spirit and everything that's the most holy and the most high and the most worthy about what humanity as a species creates that no other being is able to create on this planet. Bees do beehives and beavers do dams and spiders do spider webs, and they do all these cool things that they labor, but they can only do one thing. And none of it is like consciously planned with an aesthetic or artistic design so that people can appreciate, so that the creator can appreciate it in an aesthetic dimension. Humans could do that. And when postmodernism introduces this reign and supremacy and fetish of the depthlessness, you're basically stripping that which is the most high, that which is the most supreme of human life. You're stripping it away from humanity. And it's very sad. It's seen all over architecture. It's seen in the movies, in the shows. It's the same, just reproduced script with just various variables changed. There's rarely elements that allow you to actually think. It's just telling you a bunch of shit. And you see it all over, and you see it in fashion. And it's interesting because there's this one creator that's like just a Catholic, a conservative Catholic, and she was talking about postmodern art, how it was funded by the CIA and all these State Department entities. She talked about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, etc. And you go in the comments and you see a bunch of like conservatives that have the same values of like, art is important to human life, and this degrading of it is nasty. It's dehumanizing. Tucker has made great comments in this area. And what's interesting is that they still think that's like somehow leftist, right? And what they fail to understand is that which now they have come to think is associated with being left wing was literally devised in order to attack, in order to undermine, in order to defeat the real left wing, which were the communists, the Soviet Union, and that whole communist orbit. Andy Warhol was a direct fabrication and an orchestrated product and commodity to attack communist art, which was extremely influential, aesthetically far superior. And you just create this sort of spectacle and this sign value of exclusivity on the basis of this shitty postmodern art. And people fall for it because, you end up having this mass mentality where if enough people seemingly are appreciating this art, people come to think, wow, this is actually, there's something to this. And if I don't see it yet, it's because of me. I haven't been able to develop my senses of appreciating art just yet. And, when I look at a banana taped to a door, I don't think there's a universe in which enough study of this shitty art is going to make me appreciate that. But even when I was young and all I listened to was just hip hop and ghetto Cuban music, if I heard Beethoven, I'd be like, look, this is some dope shit. I can't fully understand it right now, but I know that if I had more cultured taste, I could maybe appreciate what's going on here. And there's a difference there. You'll never look at postmodern art and be like, if I was more cultured, I'd be able to understand what's going on here and appreciate it more. But you could do that with old art, even if you don't have the cultured taste yet developed in order to enjoy it fully.
Well, some people do think that though, like, because the other thing about postmodern artists is they're like, well, you just don't understand it. It's just too complicated for you to understand. And some people get wrapped in this like whirlwind where they buy into that and they're like, well, why don't I understand it? What's wrong with me? It's like, well, you're not retarded. That's what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
You're not a pretentious asshole who wants to play with blocks on the ground for an hour and call it art, you know, which is literally, I was sending Carlos and Noah videos. I went to this postmodern art exhibit in Chicago. It was literally stuff like that, dude. Like people playing with child's toys on the ground.
And then they want us not to have fucking gulags. How are we not supposed to have gulags if people are just playing with blocks like fucking 2-year-olds and calling it fucking art?
Like they need to bale hay. They need to be sent to the fields. Like it doesn't have to be like hard labor. They can get paid well. I mean, it's hard labor, but
it will be hard labor.
It doesn't have to be like 12 hours a day.
Send them to the countryside for 3 years. Send them and forget. That's it.
If you told Iowa farmers this, I think they'd all be on board. Like, you know, those blue-haired college students who are playing with blocks and calling it art. We're going to send them to your farm and you can just tell them what to do for 6 hours a day until they're tough and they stop being weird.
Here's what we're going to do the first year we're in power. I don't know if I should say this. I'm going to say it. We're going to, you know how different departments have like different trips that they go abroad to study? Like in my university, there was like a study in Egypt, and you would go through the history of Egyptian philosophy, how it developed into Greek philosophy. We're going to keep everything the same, but within the first year, all the gender majors, we're going to tell them that we're sending them to some remote indigenous community where gender norms haven't been established yet. And in reality, we're just going to send them to a gulag where they're going to be forced to work and become normal. And that's pretty much it. And that's it.
That's genius. They'll all sign up on their own accord. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden they'll just be on some farm in Pella, Iowa. And they're like, what the hell am I? Like, all right, get to work, son. You got cows to feed. Work from sun up till sundown. Lane says ACP needs an art division as well as literature. If you're in the ACP, we basically have an art division. It's the media department, which I run. That's why I dyed my hair. So it fit in with the art department. But we basically have one. So if you have any art skills, whether it be graphic design or you're good at drawing or anything like that, we could use you in the media department. So reach out to me on Telegram. I'll get you in our media department group chat. You can start coming to our Monday meetings if you want to get involved. And yeah, we got a lot of good stuff cooking with the media department. We've got an Instagram page for the party now. So by the way, be sure to follow our real Instagram page, which is acp.main, not acp.us or whatever the other fake account is. Someone made a fake account and has like 600 followers. So follow the real one, the one that has our launch video and some other stuff on it. But, yeah.
Guys, I'm going to tell you all a secret. We were all very frightened when Eddie bleached his hair because in order to dye it blue, you have to first bleach it. So we're like waiting, you know, when is he going to show up on a FaceTime call with blue hair? we're going to have to either break our friendship or send him to Eastern Europe on a wrestling escapade.
The first gulag patient will be me. I was one of about 1,000 kids at the wrestling, or not kids. There were about 1,000 kids with the same color hair as me at the tournament I was at last week. Because it's a thing. You dye your hair blonde for state, but I think
I did it in high school too. So
yeah,
I'm just talking
I think
shit.
I might have been the only coach though, the only adult with blonde hair. But that's why I'm the best coach. That's why the kids love me.
Fuck yeah.
Virginia Communist Party. Thank you for the $10, comrade. Appreciate you. My TikTok mutual. Opinion on youth rights and youth liberation. Well, actually, we're launching what do you mean, like abolishing bedtimes? We're launching our youth league soon, which will be aimed at organizing like university students and things like that. And ACB should sign a formal alliance with RBN. Yeah, I mean, that might be a good idea. Right now, I think an informal alliance is fine. We have them on our shows. They have us on their shows. But yeah, it's they're definitely one of our strongest allies in the sphere.
Yeah, I have tremendous respect for the folks at RBN. I lament that I wasn't able to join. Last time you and Noah went on, um, it was a very insightful conversation. I think it was a productive one, and hopefully I can talk to Nick and the rest of the crew sometime soon. Now that my schedule is a little bit more open.
Absolutely. Why? Thank you, Chima Madu. $5. Why do we have so-called Marxists in the U.S. claiming that Nicolas Maduro isn't a real socialist and he's a puppet of the China? I don't even know how to respond to that. That's insane. I haven't ever heard that before.
Because they're not Marxists. These are like the Trotskyites that say this. And interestingly, it's not just the Trotskyites anymore. It's like a form also of like a Trotskyist Stalinism. It's people who align with Stalin and who claim to be Marxist-Leninists, but who look at Venezuela and say that it's an authoritarian dictatorship, very bureaucratic, oppressing the working class. And it's basically like a copy and paste of Trotsky's analysis of the Soviet Union onto contemporary Venezuela, where you have a leader that literally looks like a Hispanic Stalin, and that and that plays into that, by the way, So it's when I was the last time I went to Venezuela, in the Venezuelan airplane, which by the way was the biggest fucking airplane I have ever seen in my life. There was like 12 rows in just like the thing. It was beautiful. There was a magazine that they give you. I don't know if they give you. I took it, but anyways, it was there in the plane, and it was halfway through the magazine, they had a comic book which was called Super Bigote, which in
Super
English,
bigot?
no, it's Super Mustache. Bigote's mustache, right? And it's basically a play on Superman and Maduro's Superman, and the villains are all like Elon Musk and the opposition, and it's super dope. And what's interesting is that the figure of Superman himself was what? The Man of Steel. It's a cartoon that's developed around the time of the Second World War, I think shortly after. And the other person that was called the Man of Steel that was fighting fascistic-like bad guys was Joseph Stalin. So I think there's a theory that the character of Superman was like this sort of Stalinist superhero, this homage to Stalin. And the fact that Maduro's playing into it is pretty cool.
That's funny. Yeah, the Chinese capitalist class has no institutional or political power in China. I know somebody who works remotely in China, and their boss is always complaining about how they can't scam people. Because he wants to live in America where he could scam people and rip people off freely, but he has to run an honest business in China because the capitalist class you're allowed to make money, but you're not allowed to do the same kind of schemes that you can in America to make yourself exorbitantly wealthy. You have to do things that benefit the whole of your society, and if you stray from that, you're going to be corrected because there's a proletarian dictatorship in China. Thank you, Popers, for the 5 gifted memberships. Appreciate you, comrade. ACP member, longtime supporter of the Midwestern Marx Institute. Looks like Sebastian, our own producer, got a membership from Popers, so appreciate you, Popers. Always giving away memberships to the homies. What parts of Gaddafiism do you disagree with? In the last, and I know Eli will agree with me on this, in the last page of Gaddafi's Green Book, he says that wrestling and boxing are the sign of an uncivilized society. And as society develops, wrestling and boxing will become a thing of the past. Other than that, Gaddafi was pretty much completely based. I don't know why his takes on wrestling and boxing weren't great. But other than that, yeah, he was pretty awesome. He had a critique of Leninism that was, I'm not going to lie, it was pretty stupid. And if he had not made that critique, Libya might not have gotten overthrown. because basically they tried to appease the U.S. over and over and over again by instituting not a proletarian class dictatorship, but like a class collaborationist view, and a view where like political democracy was prioritized above economic well-being and the protection of sovereignty against imperialism. So basically, there weren't strong enough controls placed in Libya to defend the workers' government that was created. And ultimately, that led to their overthrow. So it's like he critiqued Lenin for being too rigid against imperialism, but then got overthrown by imperialism. So I think history proved who was correct there. But as far as, everything else that's laid out in the Green Book, it's super based. His economic program was explicitly socialist. He called socialism the solution to the economic problem. It was in his solution to the problem of democracy that he ran into some pitfalls that ultimately got him overthrown by Hillary Clinton and the other war hawk pieces of shit in the U.S. and the Obama administration.
I think Gaddafi is a good example of the fact that not all socialisms are Marxist socialisms. That there's a long tradition of socialism that comes from many different sources, not just Marxism. And the way that I think we have to read Gaddafi, I think maybe even Iran, some of its more radical components, is as this alternative non-Marxist form of socialism, because ultimately what they want to prioritize is the benefit of society, not the interests of capital. But they don't have a conception of class struggle that's there. They have a conception of class harmonization, and it's the same really conception that Robert Owens, Charles Fourier, Saint-Simon, the classic utopian socialists had.
And the Ba'athists in Syria, if we're talking relevant modern examples.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
they tried to appease the bourgeoisie and establish this sort of class harmony. And they didn't do it with a Marxist-Leninist understanding that class struggle continues under socialism. They didn't do it with the Ba'athists in Syria, for example, really left like these corrupt capitalists and military officials in their positions and in power without any real land redistribution. So rather than putting their faith fully in the proletariat and the working masses, they put too much faith in the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie sold them out and ended up throwing the country into chaos. And obviously Syria is now run by terrorists as Israel seizes more and more of their land and bombs the shit out of all of their military positions. So usually this lack of Marxist analysis is what leads to corruption and the dissolution of these states. And in Iran, unfortunately, a lot of the reformist anti-revolutionary trends come from the Iranian bourgeoisie, the people with the wealth. And a lot of that wealth is frozen right now by the United States, by the sanctions. So that leads these people who are having their wealth frozen to be like, well, I'm going to sell out in order to get my wealth back. And it leads to opportunism. Same thing we saw in Syria, same thing we saw in Libya. Whereas China has an understanding that their national bourgeoisie, their national capitalist class can be useful for the construction of socialism, but they have an understanding of what their material interests are, and they are putting a constant check on them. And there's been all of the, they don't own any of the land. There's really no private property in terms of owning plots of the earth. It's all been redistributed to the people who actually work that land. So it's a much different system than Syria. You really need land redistribution. Has to be part of the socialist project. But thank you, Tommy, for the $3 super sticker. Appreciate you.
there's a question here if I'm a wrestling fan. I wrestled my whole life, when I was in Eddie's weight class, we used to run it, and it was half and half.
Yeah, Carlos is actually going to wrestle Eli after this stream. It's going to be a good match.
For those that don't know, somehow Eddie weighs like 40 pounds less than me, maybe 50. I think I lift more than him at the gym. but he can still carry me like if I'm a feather and just pin me, very embarrassingly. So yeah.
Yeah, it's the wrestler strength. There's a more less politically correct term for it too, but we'll call it wrestler strength for right now.
It's
When you
the
can,
strength that, have you seen that one guy? Man, I forget what his name is. He's like from the islands, and he's like this extremely built.
Rug,
He's always with like a white guy that has like curly hair.
is he a big black guy who's?
No, he's not black. He's brown. He's like from the islands. He
Oh,
doesn't even say what island he's from. He's like, I'm from the islands, and I would just lift tree logs or some shit. And but he's massive. Um, man, I think it's his name is like Shane or something like that. But yeah, he's got that type of strength. If you hear him speak, he's got that type of strength.
you should look up Rug. He was like a Nigerian wrestler who does that thing where they wrestle in like basically like sumo suits or sumo underwear. And then he went into MMA and he's actually doing really good. But that dude is huge. He's like 400 pounds with abs or something. He's just insane. He's from somewhere in Africa, though. He's not from the islands. I gotta look up this guy you're talking about. There's some crazy people on the internet who stem from all over, have some crazy strength. There's some guy I follow who like wears a mask over his face, and he'll just like come on the video. It's like Instagram Reels, and he'll just deadlift like 1,000 pounds and never shows his face. That's just the end of the video. He looks like an executioner or something. With our, oh, sorry, go ahead.
This guy does like challenges. The other day he did a challenge with his friend to eat 100 ice cream sandwiches, and his friend was like 30 bars deep, and he's like, I fucking can't no more. And when he turned around, he had eaten all 100, and he was like, can I have some of yours? It's like a 400-pound mammoth.
I've seen this question a couple of times. Would you go on Candace Owens? Absolutely, of course. Candace has a big following now. Obviously, I think her stuff on the Bolsheviks is nonsense, and she's like bought into some JQ talking points that I disagree with. But she's on a lot of issues, she's pretty based. Her series on Brigitte Macron, I was like obsessed with, dude. I watched it all in like one day and then rewatched it again. If people haven't seen that, you gotta watch it. It is nuts. Have you seen that, Carlos?
I saw one episode that you sent me, but there were so many episodes and I have so little time that I was like, if I'm not gonna be able to watch all of them, I don't want to watch any of them. But I was able to watch like 15 minutes. I think the summary was that like she was a man, she was a he, and maybe a P, a diddler. But I can't remember what it was. I mean, have you seen it?
It's at least a story of statutory rape. Even if the stuff about Brigitte not being a man, even if that's all BS, she was still 20 some years older than Emmanuel Macron when they got together. And Brigitte was his teacher, his professor.
How old was he?
He was like 16 when they met, 15 when they met, and then when they got married or whatever, were together, he was like 18. But also, there's abundant evidence that Brigitte is a transgender, male to female, whatever, and that Brigitte took the identity of their little sister who died. It's very, very, very weird. And at first I was like, there's no way. And then I watched it. I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. That definitely used to be a dude. But and then Candace connects it to the opening ceremony of the Olympics in France this year, where there were transgender actors or whatever. Sabbath G, thank you for the $5 super chat. Have you looked into One Dime Radio and their criticisms of Midwestern Marx? I think one time they called Haas a conservative. No, but I mean, sounds stupid. Not gonna lie. Thank you for the super chat, though. Maybe I'll check it out if they have a better critique than calling Haas a conservative. But it sounds like what we've heard a million times before.
Which is a weird critique. It's like you're gonna criticize him for what 99% of socialist states are culturally. Okay.
Right.
That's weird.
I wonder if they made the same critique of China. They're conservative because they don't.
Xi Jinping is not a communist. He's a conservative.
Mm-hmm. He's just a conservative Twitch streamer. I'm trying to find a good book to send a guy who is young and a Marxist-Leninist, but still thinks DSA could work here. What do you think, Carlos? Probably State and Revolution?
Yeah, black shirts and reds I think would be good. Because if you're in the DSA orbit, you've probably drank the Kool-Aid. If you've been there long enough, you probably drank the Kool-Aid about actually existing socialism. And that's one of the main things I think they would have to overcome, of course, because that's what leads them to have such a superfluous and ridiculous self-identification, such as democratic socialism. I mean, what other type of fucking socialism are you going to have? So yeah, I think anything that demystifies the experience of actually existing socialism would be good. And something like State and Revolution that explains like, why is it that there has to have why is the dictatorship of the proletariat indispensable for socialism? I think that would be great.
Yeah, that's a good one. I just think State and Revolution is good for Americans to read in general because there's so much put on our democracy. You know, that's what makes our country great is our democracy. And it's like, we don't have a democracy. It's completely bought. Our state is 100% a tool of the ruling capitalist class. We didn't have any choice to get involved in Ukraine. We're not able to go to the ballot box and vote to not send our dollars to the Zelensky regime and Azov battalion in Ukraine. The finance capitalists, the military industrial complex made that choice. And there's a lot of dissident energy in America goes towards libertarianism. Like they see the state and how corrupt and decrepit and horrible and violent it is. And they say, well, let's just get rid of that. If we just get rid of that government, that state, then our system will work. And it's like, well, you have to look at the forces animating the state. You have to look at the forces controlling the state, which is the private sector, which is Wall Street, which is Silicon Valley, which is the military industrial complex, which is the big banks. These are the forces controlling the state. So if you just were to hypothetically, and this is impossible and utopian, but if you were just to hypothetically get rid of the state, you would just have corporations create their own state. They would have a private military instead of a public one. And this is sort of what we're seeing with Javier Milei in Argentina. The more he just dismantles the state, the more corporations take everything over, and the worse, living conditions get for people at the bottom and the working people who actually make the country run. So that one's a good one for understanding, the nature of the government, the nature of the state, the nature of bourgeois liberal democracy. But Black Shirts and Reds is good for any beginner because there's so many myths that that book debunks about existing socialism and why they did what they did.
He says that he has read Black Shirts and Reds, supports actually existing socialism, but considers that the Norwegian models also work. I think that what you have to do then at that point is like problematize what works means in the Norwegian model and what it's premised on, because what the Norwegians and then the Scandinavian countries as a whole, but that form of quote unquote socialism it's a socialism that is quite literally like of the Second International type, opportunist through and through, and it has built its benefits and foundation just through imperialism. through this apparent neutrality that nonetheless sustains the country as a benefactor of imperialism. And it's like, well, the U.S. is running into the bank to rob it with the NATO countries, and the Norwegian and Scandinavian countries are the ones that are driving the car. And they might not look that guilty because they didn't go in the bank, but they're a part of the operation, and at the end of the day, they get a cut. And that's not socialism. If it's premised on imperialism, it's not socialism.
Absolutely. And it's being dismantled. And I mean, there's things to learn from Norway too. Like the best thing that they did was nationalize the oil sector, which is something that can be learned from. But if you leave, if you don't establish working class political dominance, if you don't expropriate political power for the working class completely, the capitalist class is just going to work to undo the welfare state and the nationalization of major industries and all the socialist economic policies, which is exactly what we're seeing in Scandinavia right now.
Eddie, there was a question here that I think would be good for us to
Yes.
address. I don't know if you've gotten into it already. It kind of overlaps with the one that Lenin Du Bois asked, but how do you see us getting into power, revolution or democracy? And look, these are things that we don't have a magic 8-ball that's going to tell us how the future looks. But from what I can see, and this is, I think, a central point of convergence and party leadership and the party perspective of the foreseeable future, there's going to be a constitutional crisis in the U.S. Such that, what we're going to have is at the level of the material institutions of society, the institutions upon which the ideas of society are premised, those are going to start to collapse. What we've seen for, I think, the last decade has been that their legitimacy has collapsed, but they have remained somewhat firm. I think that in the next 10 years or 20 years, or who knows, those themselves are going to begin to collapse. And this is going to produce an intensified crisis and fissure in society. And it's going to lead to a somewhat state of anarchy or state of civil war. This is not a state that we're going to end up producing as communists. This is a state that we're going to be faced with on the basis of the objective development of society itself. And when you're faced with that and you have different groups that are postulating different ways out of the crisis, it's the group that can affirm a sense of security, a sense of unity, a renewed sense of community and a civilizational project, the group that can bring back a sense of normalcy and stability to the country. That's the group that I think is going to win out. In the midst of the civil war and the chaos that we saw in China, the communists won not because they had the most noble ideas, but because they were amongst the masses and they gained the masses' trust. And part of that was showing the masses that only with the communists are you going to have not only a return to normalcy and this absence of chaos and constant warfare, but prosperity, which can only be built upon that sort of state of normalcy, a return of harmony or something like that. So I think that's partially what's going to happen in the U.S. You're going to have a crisis, and we're going to be faced with the crisis, and in that moment, it's going to be our time to shine. And if we don't, we'll have this deep tribalism of society and perhaps warlords and the balkanization of the country. Maybe, unfortunately, I hope not, but yeah.
Yeah, sort of like Yugoslavia, as someone said down there. And I mean, we're already seeing global contradictions. Like, you could make the argument that World War III has already been started in many ways. Now we're seeing a little bit of appeasement from Russia towards the U.S., but Ukraine was an all-out conflict, hot war between the U.S. imperialists and the East, and the DPRK, China, and Russia, and this emerging sort of multipolar world. And as those global contradictions are exacerbated, it's going to lead to internal contradictions being exacerbated. So, if the U.S. were to actually go to war all out with China and Russia, imagine the chaos that would create internally in this country, and that's the kind of thing that we're headed for. There's a deep crisis of legitimacy in our political system where people no longer feel that it's working, even people who were formerly apolitical. And eventually, the word that Haas uses is that the U.S. is going to have to be reconstituted one way or another. The current system, everybody recognizes that it's not working. The question is, what does that lead to and what direction do we go? That's still to be determined by history, but the best thing that we can do is organize, educate, get people ready as conditions deteriorate to reestablish, reassert something new and something better, and move the country forward on a socialist path of construction rather than its current path of destruction and parasitism and just being a hollow, empty culture and economy and society.
There's a good question here about what biography of Marx do you recommend? I'd recommend 3. For the most comprehensive, the one that covers all of Marx's life, there's the Soviet one that's done by Fedosiev, which is just called Karl Marx. I don't know how available it is. I have the thick hardcover version, and I think for the early Marx, there's a recent publication from Michael Heinrich, who, as an economist, I disagree quite a bit with some of his interpretations, but he's a fairly good historian, and he wrote a book called Karl Marx and the Birth of Modern Society that deals with the life of the young Marx. And then concerning the life of the older Marx, there's The Last Years of Karl Marx by Marcello Musto, who's someone I've been able to, fortunately interact with quite a few times. I've done 2 book reviews on 2 books that he's done. This is one of them. The other one he did on alienation, I also did a book review on. And that book of his, The Last Year of Karl Marx, is absolutely brilliant. I definitely recommend anyone interested to pick it up, because it's one of the most unexplored periods of Marx's life, and it's one of the most creative ones as well, because there's a renewed interest in world history and in anthropology and in mathematics and 3 million different things that are, very, very unknown as far as the life of Marx.
Yeah, those are good recommendations. I would recommend, if you're interested in movies or TV shows, there's a very good anime. I know a lot of people probably cringe at that, but even if you're not an anime fan, there's a Chinese anime called The Leader, which you can find on YouTube for free, because communism is when everything's free. That goes over the full life, basically, or the young life of Karl Marx. It's very interesting. The whole life, actually. It shows him get old and stuff, I believe. I haven't seen it for a while. But it's very good. Helps you contextualize the conditions that Marx was writing in. It was created by Chinese Marxists and scholars and animators and stuff. And then there's The Young Marx, which is a live action movie that Carlos and I actually watched together. I think that was during the founding of the ACP that we watched that with Kyle.
The launch, yeah.
The launch, yeah. That's an excellent movie. Anybody who's a Marxist needs to watch that.
We, the place we were staying at, the person that was there before left their Amazon account on, and we're like, all right, let's just buy this $4 movie with their account. So whoever that was, thank you.
Solidarity.
Communist reparations. So thanks.
Holy cow, how much money is this?
I have no idea.
What is ARS 1000?
It could be a lot. It could be 30 cents. I have no.
Thank you, Victor. Either way, it looks like a big number. What's that, Argentina?
Oh, yeah.
Argentinian peso. And 1,000 of them are
93 cents.
based. Thank you for that, comrade. Victor, what was the question? The Cuban government provided financial, logistical, and military support to various insurgent movements and revolutionary groups across LA, especially during the 60s and 70s. Like the ERP, MIR, and Tupamaro, some claim they were puppets of the Cuban government. Yes, absolutely. They did. They showed solidarity with Angola during the Civil War there. Yeah, and of course they were, just like Cuba was accused of being a Soviet puppet, which they were receiving support and funding. But of course, why wouldn't you if the U.S. is strangling you and the USSR is willing to buy all of your sugar, do the same thing. It's $9. Okay, I thought so.
They were the farthest thing from a puppet, though. There was quite a few headbutts that Fidel had with Khrushchev. I think less with Brezhnev, and then of course I don't know if they had any interactions with Andropov, but with Gorbachev, Fidel was one of the first people to sniff off his ultra leftism and his bullshit, and to bring it into question. But that was an interesting time for that to have happened, because there was many people from communist parties from around the world that sided with the Soviet in the Sino-Soviet split, who were rocking with Gorbachev.
Mm-hmm.
I know today it's persona non grata, of course, as he should be. But at the time, there was a lot of people that claimed to be communists that supported Gorbachev and thought these were genuine democratizing Leninist return to the Soviet style reforms. And Fidel had the guts to say, no, this is not that. This is a betrayal of Leninism. And it's only going to land you where eventually Russia ended up being landed, which was in the pits of hell, going through a process that scholars have called the first case of demodernization that any country has gone through. Rates of prostitution increase, living standard decreases significantly. Every single human metric that's meaningful for life goes to shit in the 90s after the collapse, the overthrow, the counter-revolution, however you want to call it, of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, they make the same accusation against the DPRK of being a puppet of China, and it's like, and the USSR, and these people have no idea that there were so many headbutts, as Carlos said. The DPRK has always been like stubbornly sovereign. You're not going to tell us what to do, even if you're supporting us, even if you're funding us economically. We are independent. We are sovereign. We won't be bossed around by anybody. That's always been like the basis of their whole social system. So the idea that they're puppets is kind of ridiculous. Even if the Soviet Union maybe wanted them to be at times, they never were.
One of the most interesting and I think powerful statements that Fidel makes is around that time, the Soviet Union had just fallen, and the atmosphere is basically that socialism is done. Of course, neoliberalism has won, the Fukuyama style end of history. And Fidel says something very interesting. He says a country's value is not measured by its land mass. It's not measured by how big its population is. It's not measured by how powerful its military is. A country's value is premised, it's based on the principles of its people. And there's larger countries that have forgone the path of socialism. And just because they're larger doesn't mean they're more valuable. This country right here that we're in, Cuba, is more valuable because we have the people that have the sort of grit and principles that are going to stick it through, irrespective of what comes their way. And that's what happened. I mean, somewhat similar effects to what occurred in the Soviet Union happened in Cuba because of the strangling blockade and the absence of the Soviet bloc and Comecom. I don't know how you say it in English, but the markets for socialist countries, it completely collapsed. And the caloric intake dropped by more than half of what it was before. I mean, just Eddie, I know you're someone who, of course, has to go on cuts for wrestling. Like, it's hard to do, and just cutting half of your caloric intake is very difficult. Try it for a couple of days. Go from 2,000 to or 2,500 calories and cut it in half. Try to survive a few days off of 1,200 calories. You're gonna go crazy. But a whole population, that happened to a whole fucking population, and they still stuck through. And they found innovative ways to develop, and they didn't develop to the level that China did. They don't have the same, anywhere near the same resources or availability to enter the
Labor
global
force.
markets or labor force, right? But they still developed, and they became, I think the statistic was that they were the most environmental developed country on the planet. Like, they developed very ingenious ways to grow in an environmentally sustainable way. At least some of the basic stuff that they were able to get from the ground. Because another thing is that the like 75% of Cuba's arable land was basically destroyed because of colonialism and monocropping. So they had to start having vertical farming in this, and all of that develops in the 90s, like very ingenious ways of producing when you quite literally have nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had to get creative with it. Thank you, Just Some Guy, for the $2 super chat. What do you think about the Greater Idaho Project? I haven't looked into it, but my brother lives in Idaho, so I'll ask him. Maybe it's something he should look into and help with. He's an engineer, so. And this one, Carlos, I gotta ask you. You've been a Texan at various points in your life. What do you think about Texan nationalism? Are you guys ready to split off from the U.S. and become your own country?
I'm not gonna lie. I've been to most states in the Union, and the only state where I see the state flag consistently in every household and sometimes even flying on top of the American flag is fucking Texas. If there's a state that would separate from the Union, it would be Texas. Economically, it would probably be fine, if not maybe even better if that happens. But I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future. There's no movement, and the one that exists is extremely tiny. I think it's also somewhat connected to the movement in California that has thought about similar changes, but it's not a realistic political solution anywhere near the horizon. It's more likely that the ACP comes to power in the next 5 years than Texas splits off from the Union.
You're not the kind of guy who says, as far as I'm concerned, the Civil War is only at a ceasefire. I heard that before.
The General Lee, I'm a Charger. That charges through the night. They're gonna clip that like he's a Confederate.
Yeah, we were at organizing event for the ACP recently, and I just put Spotify on and played random songs, and it started playing some like Confederate battle song. I put like Pete Seeger radio, and it goes right from Which Side Are You On to like Dixie. I'll go down to Dixie. Oh my God. Yes, someone's like, turn this shit off.
You probably put Kyle's favorite song, which is like 16 tons. What do you get? Another day deeper and deeper in debt. And because the same thing happened to me. It went from that. It was like an album of Civil War songs, and it was all like pro-union songs. And then out of nowhere, it's like, we're all going down to Dixie. Those stuff. I had the same experience with my class. I'm an adjunct professor, and I was having my class supervised by the department chair, which you have to do when it's like you have to do every semester. And when I was coming back from break, I usually put music before class and during break. And I had like Pink Floyd on. And when I came back, we had Lynyrd Skynyrd Freebird on. And I was like, all right, it's too late. We're just going to have to finish it. It's great music, man. Say what you want to say about the South. They know how to make some good music. That's
for sure. Thank you, Amox, for the $10 super sticker. Really raking it in today. Thanks to your guys' generous contributions, I do think I'm finally going to be able to purchase a new computer here, which is going to be nice. For the first time, I'll actually have a desktop PC too, not just a laptop. So hopefully that'll lead to upgrading all of our production value and stuff like that. So This has been a hassle going without a computer, but it's almost over. Thanks to you all.
The only thing that I still want to do in terms of production value is figure out a way to not have the camera tied to something on my table, because I want to get to the level of like table banging on videos, that like a Khrushchev level of table banging.
Like
You know
with
that
your
video? Yes, yes. I want that, for future videos, and I can't have that if just putting my elbows on the table shakes the camera.
True.
So.
True. We'll figure that out soon. We'll have a whole production studio soon. Well, do you have any other topics you want to cover, Carlos? Oh, we got another super chat. I missed it. E. Washington is trying to join Idaho. Look into it. Okay. That's interesting. Like East Washington is? I haven't heard of that. Idaho nationalism, I guess. There's like nobody in that part of the country. When I was driving through Wyoming to move my brother in Idaho, I was like, how is this real? How is this a real state in the U.S.? You go like 100 miles and there's nothing. It's like a desert. It's kind of crazy. Montana is very similar. There's just not a lot of people out there. So maybe they should take Wyoming too. I don't know. I'll get my brother on that.
It is beautiful though. I've been having these TikTok videos pop up, and it's like dudes riding buffalo in Montana with some of the craziest scenery I've ever seen.
Utah and Idaho, bro, are freaking awesome. It's like I've spent so much time in Colorado, and it will never get old. Being in Colorado feels like you're in fucking Avatar planet. It is the most insane, beautiful place. Me and my friends go. We don't get hotels. We just get our camping gear. We get hammocks, and there are dispersed free camping sites all across Colorado. And I swear I could live like that. It is so fun. But Utah and Idaho are very underrated. I feel like because a lot of people who hike and like to be outdoors also like to smoke weed. And like that was the appeal of Colorado for a while, was you could go climb mountains and smoke pot. And people overlooked Idaho and Utah. But there are some absolutely awesome hike spots and nature reserves out there.
You can get high and go high in Colorado. That should be the state motto.
Yeah, except for there's a whole half of the state where it's just like farmers and ranchers who hate weed. The eastern part of Colorado is like flat. But it's crazy driving through the east into the west. You just see these giant mountains, and you're like, how is this real? But yeah,
I'd love to see it, man. I love scenic stuff. The place where I've seen that in the U.S. has been Tennessee, Interstate 24. When I used to have to drive it, bro, it's beautiful.
We did it was like a 14-miler with my family in the Smoky Mountains, and it was freaking awesome. It was amazing.
It's pretty scary when you drive through it, because it's two-way, and there's one lane in each side. And if you end up getting it after sundown, there's like a bunch of 18-wheelers passing by. You can't see shit. And I've had to drive it in like fog with rain, sleet, dark, and it's your sack ends up coming up to your neck, and it's like the toughest thing to do. But it's absolutely gorgeous. And Venezuela, Caracas is the same, because it's got this thing called, I think, Pico de Angel or something like that. But it's like a massive mountain that's right in the middle of Caracas, and it's extremely beautiful.
Yeah. They have the biggest waterfall, or one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the world in Venezuela. I'm like, when I go, I'm going to see a lot of political stuff, but I'm also going to go see that.
I've been dying to do that. I've gone twice, and I just haven't had the time. You go, and it's like interview here, interview there, and there's so much shit going on.
We just got to go for fun sometime. That's what I want to do in Cuba, too. I just want to go hang out. I've been some people somehow in the wrestling community locally here found out that I am a communist. Well, I know how they found out, but a couple of them have been to Cuba. So every time I see them, I've been talking to them about Cuba, and they keep asking, when are you going? When are you going? You got to see it. You got to talk to the people. Tell us what you think. So, yeah, it'd be fun to, like, we're always going on business. But like my friend Dante just recently went to China just to hang out, and he like went clubbing and did fun stuff the whole time. Like that would be sick too, to just go on a vacation and make TikTok videos and shit. It'd probably do just as much for them, for me to go and show what normal life is like and make TikToks than it would for me to go, interview party members or something. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I love people, dude. So I love going to new places and just seeing what like people are like, how they
Mhm.
interact with each other. It's one of the most sacred things, I think, for human life. Aristotle used to say that the essence to like actually having eudaimonia, it's not just virtue. He talks about virtue a lot in the first few chapters and developing good habits and all this other stuff. But at some point, he's like, one of the essential things is having like genuine friends, having like good interactions with people who are not just there to like get something from you um, or use you to climb the ladder or something like that, but that actually want to um, see you succeed and all this other stuff. So I think traveling is so special because you find that, and our comrade, one of our comrades from the party, is currently in Mexico for a while, and one of the things that she has said, I think on her social media before, is that in the country she's in, it's so different because people will just interact with you, and they somehow like care more than the sort of interactions that she would have in the U.S. If you end up having like a good interaction with a person and then you see them again, you're just like friends, and that's what's expected. Um, and that level of warmth that different cultures have it's very nice to experience.
That's what these people keep telling me about Cuba. They're not communists or anything, but they're like, there's a different way of being where people are just so friendly and they'll take you in and let you stay in their house and, just ask you about, they want to know everything about your life and everything about life in the United States compared to Cuba. It's just like very friendly, and that comes from the way of life, the mode of life. We don't have housing and education and healthcare guaranteed here. We have more riches, we have more wealth around us, but we don't have access to that wealth. You can stare at it and wish you had it. And everybody's just busy. Like even in New York, you're in this beautiful city surrounded by all this amazing architecture, but everyone there is just like, gotta get to work, gotta get to the next thing, gotta get to this, gotta get to that, gotta survive. Whereas if you don't have those pressures, there's a lot more time for friendship or, even pursuing things like sports and other things where you're interconnected and interacting with other people. So.
No, absolutely. The comrade here says that Trump put new restrictions on Cuba. Man, I'm like, I'm not gonna say I'm surprised or even disappointed, but there was a part of me that thought maybe now that he doesn't have to worry about the mafia in Miami dangling, not endorsing him if he doesn't attack Cuba, maybe he'll go back to the original position he had, which was just following the thought process that Obama helped to initiate. Uh, I think as a businessman, it would have been commonsensical to just lift the blockade and allow, the American businesses to go to Cuba and Cuban businesses to sell to the U.S. And that would have been great. I know there's a big chunk of the U.S., not like super elite bourgeoisie, but like a middle level bourgeoisie that would love to be able to do that with Cuba, and bourgeoisies from other countries as well that just can't do it because of the blockade. And I really don't see how someone can make sense of someone on one end can say, look, this is the common sense administration. He's repeated this a few times. This is going to be a common sense administration. And then do such non-commonsensical things, such as sustain a 60-plus year blockade. Even if you're like, I still want to overthrow Cuba, you have to realize it makes you look horrendous in the international arena, because it's been 33 years that the whole world, with the exception of the US and Israel, votes in favor of the US lifting the blockade. You're literally consistently going against the opinion of 7.4 or 7.3 billion people, however many people are in the world. Then it's so non-commonsensical. And this is why I appreciate conservatives like Tucker. He just had on in the prime minister of the UAE or something like that, and they were talking about sanctions, and he's like, there's no instance where you can point me towards sanctions actually achieving their desired end. Not one. Not one. All they bring about is devastation for regular people. So I hope Trump can listen to some of these alternative conservative voices, people like McGregor.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting his first name, but
Douglas.
Douglas McGregor, or even Tucker Carlson. Look, if he takes I'm sure he's got a million positions that I disagree with him on. But he's outright saying sanctions are bad. We shouldn't be sanctioning any country because it's stupid, it doesn't work, and they're just not good. If that is a common sense policy, but I don't see that coming from the Trump administration anytime soon, and it's unfortunate.
No, they're like, they want to be Tucker. They like their rhetoric. In their rhetoric, they're like Tucker Carlson. Like, I'm a true paleo-conservative, actually America first. Quit investing in all these wars. Invest in the American people instead. I mean, nowadays, I agree with 99.9% of the stuff Tucker says on his show, and he's debunking these liberal idiots like Piers Morgan, and it's just out of his patriotism. This is why I say communism is the highest form of patriotism, because Tucker is coming to communist positions out of patriotism, and because he's gotten away from the corporate media apparatus, he's able to actually think critically and change his positions and think freely. He's becoming more and more of a communist every day, and that's what the Trump administration seems to pretend to be. But then they do this, totally irrational shit that Tucker Carlson is speaking out against on his show. And I know that maybe if you were listening to this show 6 years ago, that would sound crazy.
Yep.
But that's the situation we're in.
He just had Rick Sanchez on, and
from Rick and Morty.
Yes.
Okay.
Rick is someone I've talked to a few times. I've gone on his show many times. He's a great dude. He's one of the few Cubans in Miami that I don't think is a gusano. He went to the same high school as me, which was cool. We got to bond over that one time. And he was just on Tucker because right around the time that I stopped being called to do interviews, I was doing an interview, I think more than one a month in Spanish.
Oh yeah,
I was like,
saw that interview.
I was like, damn, why did I stop getting invited? Did I say something too explicitly communist or something like that? But no, he ended up getting like a phone call from the State Department telling him that he should cool it, and then within 3 weeks they passed that law that anyone that's connected to RT can potentially be imprisoned, because the idea was that RT couldn't operate in the US, and then they found a loophole, which was like his company was a separate company, and what they did was sell the show to RT. So RT wasn't operating in the US, and then they found that loophole and basically made a law so that people wouldn't be able to use it. And it's just completely contrary to free speech. And it's interesting because this is someone who's saying, like, my parents came here from a communist country, and they grew up telling me that this is the best country on the planet, and we have all these rights and free speech and all this other good stuff. And we're seeing it stripped right before our very eyes. And there's something to that approach that I think is helpful for reaching people. It's maybe not too partisan and too explicit about where they are politically, but it's a commonsensical approach. It doesn't make sense to have a situation where you can't hear the other side. How are you going to have a genuine, informed position on an affair if you're only allowed to listen to one side of it. If you're not allowed to hear what the other side thinks, it's absurd.
We need to start weaponizing your Cuban background more.
Yeah.
Be like, yeah, this guy was told that communism's evil, but then he came to America, and now he's begging on the street for money. He's begging outside the community college, dressed as a Salvation Army Santa to feed his kids.
I'll be the Diogenes of the party. Except instead of like when instead of Alexander the Great showing up and me just saying, "Move, you're in the sunlight," it's like Jackson is gonna show up and he's gonna try to give me like a cappuccino or something. Like, get the fuck out of here! I'm drinking Cuban coffee next to the street. But yeah.
Well, you got anything else you want to share before we wrap? I've been going about an hour 40 here.
Just one thing. For those that didn't get a chance to take my Marxism Leninism seminar, which I just concluded, I think 2 weeks ago. I ran a 16-week seminar on Marxism Leninism. I think this is probably the first time something like this has been done in, I don't know, a fucking century or something like that. I did 8 weeks of just Lenin. We read the most important works from Lenin, and then 8 weeks of Stalin, Mao, Dimitrov, Deng Xiaoping, and others, Henry Winston. And you can now purchase the recording, which includes the syllabus, all of the readings made available freely to you, and then, of course, the recording. And if you buy both and bundle them both, you get a $20 discount in total. So consider signing up. It's, each class was like 3 hours worth of extremely in-depth breaking down of these texts. So these are texts that every communist should read. And if it's the first time reading it, or even if it's not your first time reading it, I think you'll gain something from engaging with the collective atmosphere in which not only I presented the text, but in which everyone was able to discuss and bring new insights to it. So make sure to buy the course if you're interested in learning about Marxism-Leninism.
Absolutely. Even if you have read the text, I agree with that part. Take it. It'll still be worth your time to review it with an instructor who's educated in the history of philosophy, and just to have those conversations collectively. I know I've read Lenin's Imperialism and taught it, 10 times now, but every time I learned something new. And being able to have conversations with a diverse group of people from different backgrounds. The last class had a lot of older people in it, who obviously just have double the life experience that I do. So even though they didn't have the expertise in that book, they were still able to share things with me that I found insightful. So check out the class. Well worth your time. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarx if you want to support us financially. But with that, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Eddie Liger Power Hour. Thank you to our new producer, Eli. Get used to seeing his face while he racks up those hours for his internship. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Based.
Wrong one.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of strife. stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations, we've but one earth on which to live. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in a song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place.